Welcome to the morning edition of Arirang News. It's April 25th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Bo-kyung, filling in for Kim Da-mi. We begin with the top stories at this hour. Seoul and Washington agreed to seek a package deal by July aimed at removing U.S. tariffs on South Korea during high-level trade talks. U.S. President Donald Trump says tariff talks between the U.S. and China are close to a deal, but Beijing hits back, calling the claim baseless. YouTube is 20 years old, and content from South Korea has been chosen as some of the biggest moments in the platform's history. Finance and trade officials from South Korea and the United States met in Washington for talks as Seoul seeks a path to be exempted from tariffs before the pause on tariffs ends in July. Ji has the key takeaways from the meeting.
South Korea and the United States have agreed to produce a package of deals to remove new U.S. tariffs before the July 8 deadline, when the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is lifted. This was discussed by South Korea's Deputy Prime Minister Choi Sang-mok and Trade Minister An Dok-gun, alongside U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, during a high-level meeting in Washington on Thursday local time. Seoul's Trade Ministry said in a statement that it requested exemptions from reciprocal tariffs and offered cooperation on shipbuilding and energy. Following the meeting, Finance Minister Choi said the two sides agreed to aim for a deal by early July and explained they will hold further discussions on four key areas of mutual interest: tariffs and non-tariff measures, economic security, investment cooperation, and currency policy.
We focus particularly on the automobile sector, which faces the greatest negative impact.
Che also said they asked for understanding from the U.S. as the negotiation process could be affected by Korea's political schedule and the upcoming presidential election. He added that the two sides agreed to discuss this in detail when Greer visits South Korea to take part in the APEC trade ministers meeting, scheduled to take place for 2 days starting May 15th. Meanwhile, Bessent also told reporters that the two countries had a very successful meeting, without disclosing further details on the talks.
We may be moving faster than I thought, and we will be talking technical terms as early as next week as we reach an agreement on understanding as soon as next week. So South Koreans came early, they came with their A game, and we will see if they follow through on that.
South Korea, which faces 25% U.S. reciprocal tariffs, is among the first countries the Trump administration has initiated trade talks with. Eyes are now on whether the two countries will be able to reach a fruitful deal that will exempt South Korea from higher levies. Ji, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump said the U.S. and China held talks on Thursday to resolve the trade war between the world's two largest economies. However, China rebutted the claims, calling it fake news, and said no talks have taken place. Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump said Thursday that the U.S. and China held trade talks earlier in the morning in order to resolve the trade war between the two countries. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump said the contents of the trade talks may be revealed later, but did not elaborate further. Trump has suggested the day before that the U.S. was actively negotiating with China, raising hopes that a deal to substantially lower tariffs on Chinese imports could be imminent. Those remarks resulted in a stock market boost. However, Beijing refuted Trump's claims of trade talks between the world's two largest economies. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Trump's claims are fake news.
This is fake news. As far as I know, China and the United States have not held consultations or negotiations on the tariff issue, let alone reached an agreement. The tariff war was initiated by the United States, and China's attitude is consistent and clear. If you want to fight, we will fight to the end. If you want to talk, the door is open. Dialogue and negotiation must be equal, respectful, and mutually beneficial.
While Trump had told reporters that talks were happening between the two countries, his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said no formal negotiations had taken place. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
As we just heard, the South Korean delegation held high-level consultations with the U.S., asking for exemptions from its reciprocal and item-specific tariff measures, and agreed on some areas. With such negotiations of vital concern to export-based South Korea, we invited Professor Ho Jun-young for in-depth talks on this. Professor Ho, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here.
Good morning. Now, Professor, so Seoul and Washington reportedly agreed to seek a package deal to be made by July. How did you see the outcome overall?
Yeah, as the first official consultation, this meeting was reportedly conducted in a friendly atmosphere. I think the meeting is remarked as the beginning of working-level discussions and additional high-level talks in the future. The Korean government requested U.S. reciprocal and item-specific tax exemptions related to the Trump tariff, especially on car exports. Additionally, the Korean government proposed ways to cooperate to enhancing Korea's energy security and rebuilding the U.S. shipbuilding industry.
All right, I see. Now, Professor, it seems both countries, as you have already pointed out, agreed on a framework of consultations through the meeting, with working-level meetings to follow soon. How do you expect the talks to unfold, and could South Korea's cooperation in the shipbuilding and energy sectors help Seoul to counter Trump's tariff scheme?
I think so. The U.S. and Korea can establish a stable framework for deepening cooperations by setting joint agendas in fields such as technology. The U.S. is in urgent need of support in the shipbuilding sector, as you mentioned, while Korea possesses the world's most advanced capacity in shipbuilding. Moving forward, if Korea and the U.S. expand cooperation in shipbuilding and other technology and industrial sectors, it could serve as a kind of channel to broaden discussion into other areas, leading to favorable negotiations. Additionally, options such as increasing import of U.S. energy, investment in the U.S., and joining Alaska's LNG project could also serve as potential cards in the discussions.
All right, Professor, one more question on consultation results. Now, amid a continued high exchange rate in the 1,400 Korean won range, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mo pointed out that Seoul and Washington agreed to hold separate discussions on exchange rate policy. What could be discussed?
Regarding exchange rate policy, unlike tariff, it appears that only general discussions were held, that the U.S. has yet to present any concrete policies. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mo also stated that the two countries agreed to discuss exchange rate policy separately between Korea's Ministry of Economics and Finance and the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and he mentioned that working-level consultation would take place soon. However, it is expected the U.S. will eventually propose measures to address the economic damage caused by a strong dollar and the burden of interest rate payment on U.S. Treasury bond. Discussions related to these issues are anticipated to follow.
All right. Now, Professor, Trump is reportedly considering slashing its steep tariffs on Chinese imports to de-escalate the trade war. And not just that, he is also mulling over exemptions for automakers from some tariffs as well. Now, how would that affect both the global and the Korean economy?
President Trump has made it clear that an agreement between China and the United States is necessary, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has also expressed the view that the stalemate with China caused by tariff is unsustainable and that the situation is expected to ease. The specific tariff rate could reference discussions held last year by the U.S. House Select Committees on the strategic competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. During those discussions, it was proposed that items related to U.S. strategic interest be subject to a minimum tariff of 100%, while items only related to national security be subject to a 35% tariff. However, regarding automobile tariff, Donald Trump recently stated that the current 25% tariff on import car and key component could be raised further, not just going down, so adding significant uncertainty to the situation.
All right, significant uncertainties linger. Now, Professor, even if further negotiations between Washington and Seoul go smoothly, many say if the trade war between the U.S. and China drags on, it would inevitably affect Seoul's economy as well. Now, South Korean economy already posted negative growth in the first quarter. How do you see the impact to be, and how should Seoul be prepared for it?
Yeah, we know that Korea is export-oriented economy. The trade tension resulting from Trump's tariff pose a significant challenge. Not only is the direct imposition of tariff on Korean problematic, but the indirect impact on overseas production base is also substantial. As trade tension have heightened recently, downside risks to growth have clearly increased. Foreign exchange market volatility has risen, and the direction of trade policy remains uncertain. In such circumstances, setting a baseline for economic growth forecast is I think it's meaningless. To improve this situation, it is crucial to successfully conclude tariff negotiations with the U.S. government, and in the medium to long term, the pace of diversifying supply chains must be accelerated.
All right, I see, Professor. Well, that is all for now. Thank you, Professor He, for your insights today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
A former U.S. defense official under the Clinton administration believes the alliance between Seoul and Washington is the foundation of security in Asia, and that it should not be sidetracked by tensions over trade. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young sat down with him at the ASEAN plenum and shares his thoughts.
The South Korea-U.S. alliance is the cornerstone of military deterrence in Northeast Asia, and trade friction must not weaken it. That's the view of John Hamre, president of the Center for Strategic and International Studies and former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense, as Seoul and Washington begin a crucial round of high-stakes tariff talks in D.C. With U.S. duties on foreign steel, autos and aluminium still unresolved, along with new 10% baseline tariffs on all imports, Hamre says preserving strategic trust between the two allies is more important now than ever. While President Donald Trump's 90-day delay on rolling out country-specific tariffs has created room for dialogue with trading partners, expectations of a major breakthrough may be overly optimistic.
What I've heard from other governments that have had conversations on tariffs is that there are four things that are non-negotiable. The 10% base tariff is non-negotiable. The tariff on 25% on aluminum, 25% on steel is non-negotiable. That they've been told the tariff on cars and automobile parts is non-negotiable.
Still, Hamre sees an opening, especially for South Korea and Japan, to make meaningful progress. Acting President Han Duck-soo has called for a win-win solution, suggesting Korean shipyards could help boost America's naval vessel capacity. Seoul could also buy more U.S. liquefied natural gas and aircraft, and even address non-tariff barriers such as platform fees and pharmaceutical pricing.
Korea and Japan have sophisticated government agencies. So I think that you have an opportunity to, take advantage of this early moment. I think you're very fortunate as a nation to have an acting president who was a trade negotiator. I mean, he knows how these things go. He knows what the dynamic is like. He has a very good understanding of the Korean economy. So I think you are in, compared to most countries, pretty good condition for taking forward these conversations.
President Trump has suggested a one-stop shopping deal that presumably merges trade and defense cost sharing into a single package. However, Seoul believes security contributions and trade issues should be handled separately. In a new bilateral deal last year, South Korea had already agreed to hike its share of defense costs to support U.S. military presence on the peninsula.
I personally, I don't think it's easier to find a solution to either the tariff issue or the security issue if we put them together. Korea's spending almost 3% on its defense, and therefore that should be good enough on tariffs. So I do think it's probably important to focus on the foundational question of why is the alliance important. And I think you'll find a lot of support among American politicians for that.
The significance of these impending talks goes beyond figures. They speak volumes about the current US posture over the first 3 months of Trump's second presidency. Rather than reinforcing alliance principles or addressing regional security issues, Washington has doubled down on a transactional approach with its partners.
And in my view, the US-Korea alliance is the absolute foundation of security in Asia. If we're together, there won't be war. If we fall apart, I'm very worried about the future. So I hope we can stay together.
As talks begin, the consultations will not only be a test of trade policy, but of the strength and trust underpinning one of America's most vital alliances in the Indo-Pacific. 오수영, Arirang News.
Turning to the latest in the presidential primaries, the Democratic Party candidates visited the party's stronghold Southwest region on Thursday to boost their votes as the primary closes on Sunday. Meanwhile, the People Power Party's one-on-one debate started, which will run until this weekend as well. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
With the voting for the Democratic Party of Korea members in what's known as the Honam region, the traditional stronghold of the DP going on, the party's presidential primary contestants on Thursday all visited the region to push their candidacy. The Honam region consists of the Jeollado provinces and Gwangju City. Frontrunner Lee Jae-myung visited Jeollabuk-do province first, where he shared his renewable energy plans and went on to visit Gwangju City, located further south. There, he visited the May 18 pro-democratization movement sites and emphasized the importance of democracy, with a new election stemming from a president being impeached for declaring martial law. The two trailing candidates, Kim Kyung-soo and Kim Dong-yeon, are also in the region, visiting key local points to meet as many people as possible. The voting in this region closes on Saturday. Meanwhile, the last set of regions for voting, the capital region Gangwon-do province and Jeju, started on Thursday. This wraps up on Sunday, when the final winner will be announced at the party's convention. Meanwhile, for the People Power Party, 2 one-on-one debates were held for the second round of its primary. With the PPP race having no clear frontrunner, these second-round debates are expected to be crucial. Kim Moon-soo and Han Dong-un kicked them off, as Kim is known to have been against Yoon's impeachment and Han was pro-impeachment. Kim questioned Han about his fallen relationship with former President Yoon. One thing to keep an eye on in the PPP race is this aspect, as some PPP electors still support Yoon. And for the second round, the votes will be 50% PPP electors and 50% on open survey, giving more weight to individual PPP electors. A similar debate took place between An Chol-soo and Kim Moon-soo. An famously voted for Yoon's impeachment motion, and Kim pointed out that An even served as the chair of the Presidential Transition Committee. For Friday's 2 debates, Han Dong-un and Hong Jun-pyo picked each other for their slots, making their debate a 3-hour-long one. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Amid concerns in Seoul over Chinese structures built in disputed waters of the West Sea, Beijing has reportedly said that South Korean officials can visit the area and see the structures for themselves. This was conveyed during a closed-door meeting in Seoul on Wednesday between officials from the two countries, when China claimed the structure was built for fish farming and that it had nothing to do with territorial rights. From 2018 until last year, China built 3 structures in the Provisional Maritime Zone, where the two countries' exclusive economic zones overlap, causing concern in South Korea that Beijing could possibly be seeking territorial rights in the area. The U.S. State Department also criticized China on the issue this week, saying Beijing's refusal to abide by international law causes instability in the region. YouTube celebrates its 20th anniversary this year, and content originating from South Korea has been chosen among the biggest moments in the platform's history. The New York Times marked the occasion on Wednesday with the 18 biggest moments, which include Psy's Gangnam Style and the children's song video Baby Shark. The article said that Psy released his song Gangnam Style in July 2012, and by the end of that year, it had become the first video on the internet to surpass 1 billion views. It went on to say that the Baby Shark video became the most viewed video in YouTube history in November 2020 and still holds the record with 15.8 billion views.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. Starting in Ukraine, Kyiv has seen the most devastating attack in 9 months as Russian forces fired a barrage of missiles and drones at the capital city overnight. In the early hours of Thursday local time, Russia conducted a massive combined missile and drone attack on Kyiv, killing at least 12 people and injuring over 90. The strikes, which began around 1 a.m., targeted multiple districts and caused significant damage to residential buildings and vehicles. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called the assault one of Moscow's most outrageous, while officials reported that it involved ballistic missiles. The attack comes amid heightened tension over negotiations to end the ongoing conflict. U.S. President Donald Trump urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop such attacks while continuing to pressure Ukraine for concessions. China has successfully launched its Shenzhou-20 crewed mission, sending 3 astronauts to the Tiangong space station. This marks the nation's 15th manned spaceflight. On Thursday at 5:17 p.m. local time, the Shenzhou-20 spacecraft lifted off on a Long March 2F rocket from a satellite launch center in northwest China. Approximately 6.5 hours later, it docked with the Tiangong space station. Mission Commander Chen Dong on his 3rd spaceflight and first-time astronauts Chen Zhongrui and Wang Jie will spend 6 months on the space station conducting spacewalks and field experiments. They will replace the Shenzhou-19 crew who have been aboard Tiangong for 175 days and are scheduled to return to Earth on April 29th. The European Union is set to present a comprehensive roadmap in May specifying its strategy to eliminate all imports of Russian fossil fuels by 2027. The initiative announced by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Thursday is a response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and aims to bolster the EU's energy independence. The EU has made significant progress in reducing Russian gas imports from 45% in 2021 to the current 18%, increasing LNG imports from the United States and gas supplies from Norway to compensate. The roadmap may include legal measures to allow EU companies to end existing contracts without penalties. Finally, in Rome, the Vatican is finalizing preparations for the funeral of Pope Francis, who died on Monday at the age of 88. The funeral scheduled for Saturday will reflect the Pope's wishes for a modest ceremony. The funeral mass in St. Peter's Square will be attended by some 130 foreign delegations, including 50 heads of state. Following the service, Pope Francis will be buried at the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome, marking the first papal burial outside the Vatican since 1903. A 9-day mourning period will begin after the funeral, during which masses will be held in memory of the late pontiff. The conclave to elect his successor is expected to commence after May 5th.
We We've had a significant temperature drop overnight. It's also cooler than what we typically expect for late April. The afternoon will also be cooler than yesterday. And this weekend looks to be more of a typical spring weather with large daily temperature swings. However, we do have some yellow dust drifting in, which could make the air quality a bit hazy in the central regions and Gyeongsangdo provinces, especially during the morning hours. Then afternoon highs will be 1 to 9 degrees Celsius lower than yesterday, topping out at 18 degrees here in the capital, Daegu, Gyeongju, both seeing a high of 20 degrees, which is about 8 degrees lower than yesterday under bright sunshine. We'll also have to brave strong winds across the country, and on top of that, the air in the eastern regions is gradually becoming drier. Pleasant spring weather persists through the end of April with rain in the forecast on Jeju on Sunday. Just remember that big temperature difference between morning and afternoon and do dress in layers to stay comfortable throughout the day.
That is all we have at this hour. We'll be back with more updates at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.
Set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food, and even K-beauty. Korean cultural content is gaining more and more fans worldwide. It's indeed the golden age of K-culture. But with this growing interest comes an increase in misinformation about Korea. There's so much inaccurate information out there. Even AI can sometimes get it wrong. So, we must set things straight and correct all the misinformation. So here's the plan. The Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, VANK, and Arirang TV present the Get Korea Right project. Our goal is to provide accurate information on important keywords that come to mind when we think of Korea. Blatant errors and false claims that distort history. It's time to set the record straight, sharing the true history and culture of Korea while raising the national brand. Let's get started with Get Korea Right. Are you ready to join?
bringing a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bring news just for you. It's Friday, April 25th here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin, and thank you for joining us on News Generation. Joining us today is Lee Won-bin.
Good morning.
Good morning, and we're delighted to have Christopher Gao back on the show. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again.
Great to have you back. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. So we're going to move on straight to our main discussion of the day. Friday means it's time to dive into topics with young people, resonating with young people around the world. Now, with wars always in the headlines and high global tensions, many countries are putting an increased emphasis on security. While war has always required manpower, many countries today are facing this new challenge. That is, they simply don't have enough young people willing to serve. So today we are going to look into this issue and also explore the reasons why. So starting off, Christopher, let's begin with the status quo. So what exactly is going on?
Right, so earlier this year, I would say the kind of background to this is that the prevailing sentiment in Europe has been that President Trump has essentially blown up the transatlantic alliance, like he sidelined the European countries in the negotiations with Russia and Ukraine over the peace talks. And so I think there's a sentiment that they need to rearm by themselves in order to guarantee their own security. So essentially, they have been launching these programs like the Readiness 2030 plan, where they're pledging up to 800 billion euros in order to rearm for themselves. So I think Europe is trying to pick up the slack that the U.S. has left. And now more than 2/3 of European countries are actually meeting that target of more than 2% of GDP on defense spending. But despite those gains in this renewed push, manpower shortages remain a significant obstacle to Europeans and other countries kind of taking more of an active role in their own security. So for example, apparently Germany has a stagnant active duty force at around 180,000 troops, even amidst this push for increased recruitment. Another example in the UK, apparently only 10% of respondents to a survey said that, and this is among the Gen Z demographic, only 10% said they would be willing to enlist in the events of war, and that's down from a half since that was in 2004. So apparently, declining willingness to join the military is one problem, and I would say another big problem is the kind of fitness to serve. So in America, apparently only 23% of people are meeting the Army's like physical, moral, and emotional standards. Educational standards among the 17 to 24 age group. So we're dealing with an increasingly narrow group of people who are able to serve in the first place, and then on top of that, people are less willing to serve in general. So apparently, I will say the U.S. has counteracted this decline in enlistment rates somewhat through this program called the Future Soldier Preparatory Course. So they were able to increase the amount of enlistments from 44,000 in 2022 to 55,000 in 2024. So they're making some inroads there, but I do think that the long-term demographic trends are kind of posing a big problem for recruiters. There's just simply not enough young people to fill these ranks.
Right. So first of all, not enough number of young people, as Christopher mentioned, and also a growing sentiment of unwilling to serve for their country. So to help us better understand public sentiment around this issue, we're going to introduce you a survey on the willingness to serve during wartime. So Won-bin, please walk us through the findings.
Sure. So I think Chris just gave us a really good overview of the current ongoing situation of declining conscription list. And I brought a data to share. So last year, the international polling agency Gallup did a survey asking people from different countries if they would fight for their country. The result of the survey gives us some points to discuss throughout our show, and let's take a closer look at the stats.
Okay.
In Armenia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Georgia, more than 80% of the answers was yes. On the other hand, we have Japan at 9%, Italy at 14%, and Australia coming in at 20%, USA at 41%, and lastly, South Korea at 46%. Excuse me. Now, as you can see, something noticeable is that most developed countries, like European countries, have a very low rate of positive answers. So yes, all below 50%. And personally, I'm also surprised that South Korea only came in at 46%, considering that we are a country that is still in war.
Right, because when we look at the countries that have a high percentage, we can see that they were in the 80% range, as you showed, but we've also seen countries in the 10% range and South Korea in the 40% range. So now I want to hear more from our panelists. If your country were at war, so we're going to start with you, Won-bin. So if war resumed in Korea, are you willing to take up arms? What's your take on this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a no-brainer. So as someone who proudly served my military service in Korea, I think it shouldn't even be a question. To share my personal story as like background information for the viewers, I voluntarily served my military service in the JSA, which stands for Joint Security Area, or Panmunjom in Korea, which is the only portion of the Korean border where North and South Korean soldiers face each other. And it serves as a site for political meetings and negotiations. For the viewers, you may have encountered it in news. It's the border with the blue buildings. It's also very popular for President Trump and Kim Jong-un meeting as well. And during my service, I personally witnessed and experienced the tension between North and South Korea. And one thing that I can confidently say in front of everyone is that freedom is not free.
Right.
Korea's peace is being held by hard work and sweat from soldiers in the army, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even in night times. And this is me being very concise. Like, I cannot emphasize this enough. And therefore, as a young man, as a young Korean male who has a strong, healthy body, I'm fighting for my country. And because that's how South Korea existed until today. And honestly speaking, like, would I be scared? Yes. Would I rather stay at home and be together with my family instead? Of course. But someone has to protect this country. And honestly, I'm more than honored to serve my country and fight to protect my people and family when the time comes, if it does. And now into the conditions, I hope that the government can come up with a program that can properly compensate either financially or socially to the soldiers that participated voluntarily to protect their country. And honestly, that's the one thing that I ask from the country.
And we're going to talk a bit more about that in the later part of our show. Okay, now to you, Christopher, what do you think?
Right, so to the question of whether I would, take up arms if my country were at war, I think it definitely depends on what kind of war we're talking about. So I think in the unlikely event that China or Russia were to invade the, United States and if the homeland were under attack, I think I would be prepared to take up arms. And I think a lot of young people my age might also feel a need to defend the homeland in that scenario. But I do think, a lot of the things in the public discourse today, like talking about, making Canada the 51st state or taking Greenland for the resources or like a war with Mexico to get rid of the cartels. Like, I mean, these are the things that our Americans are hearing in terms of how the military might be used. And I don't think I would be interested in participating in a war of that nature. And that, is nothing to say for, kind of imperialist wars in the Middle East. I think a lot of young people in America, and I certainly would not be prepared to fight for resources like oil in the Middle East. So I think it definitely depends what kind of war we're talking about. Defensive war, I would take up arms, but other kind of useless or pointless territorial disputes, I wouldn't do that.
So it will depend on the scenario or the conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so to hear more opinions, we're first going to bring in a Korean millennial who voluntarily enlisted in the military. We'll be right back after a short break.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search our channel Arirang News. Click Community and leave a comment down below. Make a new type of news with us.
We are welcoming Korean millennial Woo Hee-jun to our show today. Welcome, Hee-jun.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So we're going to start with our very first question for you. So we know that you voluntarily joined the military, even though you weren't required to, because only able-bodied men in South Korea are required to do their mandatory military service. So our big question is, what really drove you to take that path?
Well, I come from a background as a professional athlete and also the daughter of the police officer. Discipline and serving having always been a part of my life. So both words taught me the value of the sacrifices and commitment and protecting the others. So watching my father put on his uniform every day and serve with the pride had a deep impact on me. So even though I wasn't required to serve, as you said, and also required to enlist it, but I felt like a strong internal drive to contribute to my country in a meaningful way.
Right, so thank you for sharing your personal story. Now, as you know, South Korea is still technically at war, and if a fighting or a war breaks out, are you willing to take the part in the fighting and join the war?
Well, without hesitation, big yes. There's a commitment I'm already made it, so not just once, but continuously. even after completing my active duty service, I choose to remain in the reserve officer. And so I'm currently undergoing the training with no legal obligations to do. So simply like because I believe in the being ready, service doesn't end with a discharge date. It's a lifelong mindset, I guess. So it might confuse me. I will be there and I'll train for it and I will live for it. So I'm kind of prepared for that.
Do you want to ask a third question,
Right,
Chris?
we had one more question for you. So South Korea is among several nations facing a shortage of military personnel. So in your view, how can this be best addressed?
Well, I believe we need to redefine how we view the military services, not just as an obligation, but as an opportunity to grow and lead and contribute to something greater than ourselves. So by enhancing the support system for the service member, I guess providing better educational and career pathway and during or after their time in the uniform, and also sharing more stories of the positive service experiences, I guess, particularly from those who choose this path voluntarily. So could also inspire a new generation in other ways. But I hopefully that with the right mindset and policies, we can overcome this challenge. And also, I truly believe that with the right visions, we can foster a culture where the more people want to serve, not because they have to, but they are proud to.
Definitely. All right, Hee-jun, thank you so much for your time today and hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're now going to dive a bit deeper into the reasons why more young people are seemingly unwilling to serve in the military. So starting with you, Won-bin, why do you think young people today are less willing to fight for their countries, even at a time when national security is at stake in a lot of countries? Oh, sorry, I'm going to start with Chris.
Sure. Yeah, so I think I can speak to the American perspective a bit. I think perceptions of the military have gotten worse in recent years in America. I think there's been a politicization of the military that kind of runs parallel to the broader kind of polarization in society as a whole. But I do think under Trump's first term, he did kind of, say he was going to use the military or the National Guard to squash protests he didn't like. And I think a lot of Americans saw that and didn't like the idea of participating in some kind of anti-democratic, use of the military like that. I will also say more broadly, the perceptions of the military might not be as good, or the perceptions of serving in the military might not be as good because of this, the forever wars in the Middle East that America was participating in. So we had 20 years in Afghanistan. We failed at nation building there, and Americans are, maybe not seeing how these wars strategically benefit the United States. And, that's nothing to say for how that benefits, how that helps their life, personally. I would say another thing, there's a lot of increased competition in the job market. So the civilian sector, there's a lot of companies that offer a lot of benefits now that were things that only the military used to provide, like tuition assistance and loan assistance. Now a lot of corporations are providing those benefits, and it's just like, well, why should I go to the military when I can get these benefits at a company where I'm not putting my life in, at risk in that way? And I think to that point, we can also see what modern warfare is like so much easier now because of the social media, because of GoPros. It's like, I can see these Ukrainian soldiers, running from these FPV drones.
Very graphic images and footage,
right? And there's nothing you can do in that situation. I think that seeing that brutal reality up close and instantaneously, almost in some cases, I think that's really reinforcing this. Why would I want to participate in something like that as a young person? So I think that's increasing or declining morale is probably in part due to that, I would say.
Oh, right. So declining morale due to both domestic and international factors.
Right.
Okay, then I think you'll be able to give us another opinion, Won-bin, because you're currently based in Korea. What do you think?
Yes, so for Korea, it's definitely a bit of a tricky question because in Korea, serving the army is necessary for most Korean men. So it's definitely a bit of a unique case compared to most of the other countries where they do not have mandatory military service. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm someone who believes that it's the citizen's sacred duty to protect their own country. But even someone who has a strong belief like that, like me, also agrees that joining the army is very distant from being compatible with modern society, as it completely stops us from our academics or career for a full year and a half, or basically 2 years. And if we're talking about a war, the risk only becomes higher. Now, because of this disparity and the growing trend of individualism in Korea, a lot of MZ generations are not accepting the fact that serving their country is a basic duty for them. However, like Chris mentioned, this is not only a problem in Korea.
Right.
It's happening around the world. It's a global phenomenon. And to give another illustration, the middle-aged group in Russia still believe that the poverty and the national threat is coming from the Western countries, whereas the younger generations who don't have the Soviet perfume constantly debate about the necessity and the justification of war, leading to a number of anti-war protests in Russia.
I see. So for a more global perspective, we also wanted to hear what our viewers think. So we ran a poll on our Arirang News YouTube channel. We asked them, would you be willing to fight for your country if war broke out? And if not, what's your biggest reason? So the options were number 1, survival comes first. Number 2, I'm against war and violence. Number 3, I don't believe I'm obligated to sacrifice. And number 4, other. So if we look at the results, 44% of those chose not willing to fight, said it was because they're against war and violence, followed by survival comes first and no duty to sacrifice themselves. We're also going to take a look at 3 comments left by our viewers. Our first comment for this Friday is by DKFM1077. The idea of defending your homeland is often a myth. War won't remember your name. It will leave you with scars, loss, and trauma. Even if by some miracle you survive, it changes everything, your body, your mind, and the world you once knew. Corn8857 says, because I'm against war, but it could depend on the war. Our final comment, RKZLTV, it depends on whether my country is the one attacking or being attacked. If it's the aggressor, I don't see any obligation to take part. So we could see various opinions by looking at the comments of our viewers. So before we move on to the final question of our discussion, I would like to briefly ask our panelists your thoughts after reading these comments and also looking at the results of the poll.
So it's definitely did change compared to the past, and I do think it's understandable. I can definitely see where this is coming from, because if you kind of look at the modern history, the younger generations, the MZ generations, or the ones who are in their 20s and 30s currently, their life was very distant from any kind of war or very serious conflicts, except for the Russian-Ukraine war that happened recently. And for us, war is something that's only in the history book or the movies, and it's something very distant from our real life. And if we, even for Korea, if we would have to go up to our grandparents or sometimes our parents to meet or see people who actually have experience in the army or during a war. So as the world becomes more stable and the economy becomes more developed, I think it is a natural situation where people feel less responsible, or they feel very defensive when it comes to fighting for their country or joining the war. So I think it's definitely understandable.
And do you also relate to these findings, Chris?
Yeah, I think those findings make a lot of sense, especially those comments and the distinction between defending your homeland and being the aggressor. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's understandable why people would feel that way. I will also mirror what Wonbin said earlier. I do think that the fact that our generation is removed so far from conflicts like World War II or the Korean War or Vietnam in the case of America. We don't have, an uncle or a parent who might have served in the military, but go back only 2 generations or so in America, and it's like, everybody had a dad or an uncle or somebody who fought in World War II. And so that's a big difference, and we're just we're that much more removed from people who actually served, and so we don't really see that level of sacrifice, I guess, on a daily basis. So that could be a big reason for this change in stats.
Absolutely. And ending off, this is actually a topic that really hits home for many of us around the world, especially as the world feels increasingly unpredictable. So I want to ask our panelists, after our discussion today, any final thoughts related to today's topic?
Yeah, so I did mention this in the beginning, but I think compensation and respect will be the most important factor in modern world in 2025.
That's what Heejun also mentioned too.
Yes, yes. And like Chris said earlier, right now it's an era of information and individualism. And all news, stories, information and footages are accessible and shared instantly. And most people, unlike the past, most people won't just blindly join the war when there's nothing foreseeable other than years of fighting and combat with nothing in return. And I think in this part, Korea is actually doing a pretty good job since they've been increasing the salary of mandatory service soldiers for the past few years. However, in the case of war, a much bigger guarantee or a benefit must be given. And just to be clear to the viewers, I'm not saying that the country paying the soldiers or the people will just make things even or even things out, but I think it's the minimum guarantee that the country can give to the ones fighting for their country, so they can have the pride and the motivation to protect their country and realistically less worry about the post-war era and their family.
Right, because they are putting their lives on the line when they're participating in warfare. And what are your thoughts, Chris?
Right, yeah, I totally agree with that last point there by Wonbin. I really think that the incentives need to be changed for people participating in war, like in order to compete with the civilian sector, which increasingly provides more benefits to people which are competing with recruitment. I'd also say I think we need more support for veterans, so more mental health care and things like that in order to support the people who actually put their life on the line. And I think the lack of those systems in place are also a big problem. I will say one other thing, I do think that despite the survey data, I think when push comes to shove, people will probably, participate in a war when their country is at risk of being invaded or in some kind of territorial conflict like that. There's a lot of historical examples, like, if you look at when North Korea shelled Yeonpyeong Island back in 2010, there was a huge surge of enlistments, and to the point where the Marines didn't even know what to do with all the new recruits. And so I think when push comes to shove, people will participate. And if you talk about things like, okay, there's a limited conflict on the Korean Peninsula, and let's say North Korea collapses, and then China, the reports are that China's swooping in to occupy the northern territory. Do you really think that young Korean men will just sit idly by and let that happen?
I think I'm putting my uniform on right away.
Yeah. So in those situations, people will absolutely step up to the plate. So I wouldn't put too much weight on the survey data, but it is relevant and it should be looked at for sure.
But hopefully none of those scenarios will happen, because what we really hope for is no war in the world.
Absolutely.
All right, and that's all we have for today, but NewsGen will be back next Monday at 10:30 a.m. Korea time. Special thanks to Wonbin.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, and Christopher Gao.
Yep, thanks so much.
Thank you, and to our viewers, thank you for spending time with us, and we'll see you next week. We are News Generation.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your